Hello, welcome to Fintech Impact. I'm your host, Jason Pereira. Today's show, I have Abraham Okusanya of Timeline. Timeline is an online platform that allows people to stress test the decumulation phase of their life and allows them to come up with a decumulation plan that is dealing with one of the most difficult issues in financial planning, decumulation. And with that, here's my interview with Abraham. Abraham, thanks for taking the time.
Hi, Jason. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. So, Abraham Okusanya of Timeline, tell us about Timeline.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jason. Timeline is the next-gen retirement income platform. We help financial planners and enterprises apply extensive data and rigor to create elegantly simple withdrawal strategies for their client. Ultimately, our mission is to create retirement income plans where the money outlives the people.
Excellent. So this is not something to be underestimated. So sometimes this is taken for granted by people who don't understand it. But, Bill Sharpe himself, the Nobel Prize winner, said it is the nastiest, hardest problem of retirement finance. And when you think about it, it's true. I mean, the reality is you're trying to project out a timeline that is going to be multiple decades long when the variables for return are variables. They're not constants. And the endpoint is a variable as well. So you have all these conflicting things, and then your consumption as well is a variable. So you have no certainty, quite honestly, none. There is no certainty in any of the variables. And trying to make sure that you do this with a high degree of success can be incredibly difficult. And most financial planning softwares have already embedded some sort of stress test, like a Monte Carlo analysis. We'll come back to that later. But before we do, let's talk about the origin of Timeline. What was your journey prior to this, and what inspired you to start this company?
Thank you very much. I spent the last decade or so in financial services as a consultant to financial advisors and brokerage platforms out there. And I came to a very simple realization that the way we do retirement income planning sucks. It's really bad. I think you alluded to some of the problems that we are facing. We are at a crucial point now that there was a recent research by the World Economic Forum, and they looked at retirement savings across developed countries, including the US, including Canada, the UK, Japan, Australia. And they came to this simple conclusion that a typical person who is approaching retirement today is on track to run out of money 10 years before their average life expectancy, right? So that's just the average life expectancy. Let's not think and talk about people who live longer than that because, as you know.
Let's also take a minute here. Let's take 1 minute to define average life expectancy because This is the thing, right? So life expectancy, a lot of people have really no idea what this is. They hear life expectancy and they think, I'm supposed to live to that age. That is a median point. That is an average. And I got into a debate with a client once who said, well, life expectancy is only X. I'm like, yeah, but your probability of living beyond that's 50% because that's only an average. And like, well, that's your opinion. I'm like, no, that's not my opinion. That's the definition of it. And I'll look it up for you. And, we had a debate about this. Well, I can't see how I'm going to live beyond that. It's like, look, here's the stats. Here's the chart, right? So when we create the illusion of a deterministic outcome for life expectancy. Yes. So it's important to remember that that's not the case. Continue, please.
No, I think that's it. That's a brilliant point. The way I like to explain it to people is that if you put 165-year-olds in the room, 50 of them would die before that life expectancy that you're talking about. The other 50 will live longer than that, and some much, much longer than that. So you're absolutely right. And I think that drives home one of the core challenges and problems that we have with traditional financial planning tool in the sense that they are not modeling reality. They approach probabilistic problems in a deterministic way. If you think about the key challenges or the key inputs of a decumulation plan, that being the return, the longevity, and inflation, none of these things exist in the straight line, simple way that the traditional financial planning tools illustrate. And so we saw an opportunity there to bring Timeline to the marketplace to help address this problem. And the other thing is that it's not like retirement income planning or decumulation, as is known, is a virgin field without extensive research and rigor. But until Timeline came on the scene just over 3 years ago, we saw this huge gap between what the research and the evidence and the data says about how we should be thinking about decumulation plans and what financial planning tools actually do. And so Timeline was created to plug that gap.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, first off, I mean, one of the things I always coach people on when I'm coaching about how to do financial planning is the need for stress testing. And part of that involves a Monte Carlo analysis, because that to date has been pretty much the benchmark for what we use in terms of stochastic modeling. At least it's what everybody understands. And Michael Kitces loves to share the old Keynes quote of, I'd rather be vaguely right than precisely wrong. And that's exactly one of the reasons. Like, because I have the biggest problem with these plans, when people present a plan, it's just a straight line and no example or demonstration that this is a probabilistic outcome and that there's a range of expectations. We're selling, all financial plans are basically wrong the day that they're minted, because it's a snapshot in time and we can't tell the future. We're making educated guesses. If you're trying to say that your educated guess is a straight line, that is a really, really bad statement to make. So I would rather show outcomes. So let's talk about specifically how Timeline solves for this problem. So you haven't built a full financial planning suite. You built one that's specifically narrowly focused on one true value proposition, which is a very smart move, by the way, because there's a lot of competition in the robust section. Tell me about how, what are the inputs? What am I giving you? And what are the outputs? What are you giving me in return in order to solve this problem?
That's a brilliant question. So in terms of the input, of course, we want to know the basic details of the client. So that includes their current age, their marital relation, their marital status or relationship status. We need some basic information about the client. Then we need some information about their, what we would call retirement resources. That might be their, retirement portfolios, other income sources in retirement, such as Social Security that they might have. I know you guys in Canada call it a different name, but these pensions, these sort of resources and asset that they have in retirement. And the uniqueness of Timeline is that rather than just going straight to Monte Carlo simulations, we actually take a little bit of a step back. We think about the client's longevity. So we give the advisor an indication of the longevity risk that the client is confronting. And the way we do that is to look at the survival probability for that client and to say, as a starting point, don't plan for the life expectancy. Let's attack the tail end of the longevity risk to start with, which we define roughly about the age that the client has a 1 in 10 chances of surviving, right? So we start the planning there. The second thing is that then when it comes to, how do we model the investment side of things? Well, what we do in Timeline has 120 years of capital market data. And we have that data for, frankly, some 40 different asset classes, including Canadian equities, US equities, global equities, UK equities, bonds, other asset classes. We have discrete monthly data for 120 years of capital market data. And what that means is that you tell us your portfolio, we match that portfolio to the right asset classes, and then we say, right, assuming that you have this portfolio, let's run rolling periods for over the last 20 years. So let's say you have a 32-year retirement to go based on this longevity risk. We run every rolling 32-year period that we've seen using monthly data over the last 120 years. And what that would allow us to do is to stress test your financial plan through real life events. We're not talking about a hypothetical scenario. We're talking about, what if you started your retirement on the eve of the Great Depression? What was that journey like? It would be very different if you started bang in the middle of the Great Depression. It would be very different if you started at the start, you began your 32-year period at the start of World War I or World War II or HN is the H1N1 flu pandemic. We test all of these scenarios. We will literally test hundreds of scenarios, and we would then give you an indication of the likelihood or the probability of success. And we can unpack what the success rate or probability of success means and how we think planners should be using this. But the underlying point is that we give you a metric, a reassurance of whether your plan, what you want to do, is likely to be successful. And there are all sorts of indications that we give, including what the sustainable withdrawal rate would look like, from your overall plan. And what we do is not just to look at your portfolio in isolation, we take into account all the other stuff that you've got going on as well.
Excellent. So, I mean, first off, you're basically taking the position that, hey, if this never worked at any point in history, the odds of it working ever again are pretty slim. And that's not a bad place to start, quite honestly.
Absolutely. I mean, you can the thing. So we have, you can move on if you want. If that level of assurance is not enough for you, we think it should be. But if it's not enough for you, then you can go on to Monte Carlo simulations and plug in your own expected return.
Yeah.
But the problem, the challenge I say with Monte Carlo simulation is that just before, you need to be able to compare your expectation with reality, right? So we start by giving you that real picture based on empirical data says, and then you can compare and contrast with your own expectation of return. I like to say, just because you expect any given level of return from the capital market doesn't oblige the capital market to deliver it. And if anything, just the year that we've had, the last year shows, is that the capital market is pretty adept at delivering unexpected returns. So the beauty of timeline is you can contrast your own expectation of return in a Monte Carlo simulation with the reality, with the weight of historical evidence over the last century or so.
I think it's interesting. I think Monte Carlo doesn't have the same problem historical evidence does, because historical evidence, people almost look at it as proof that's going to happen in the future. Whereas Monte Carlo, we know it's assumptions, right? This is one of my big issues with sustainable withdrawal rates is like, they're sustainable today, but are they sustainable tomorrow? And, as I always say, the 4% rule is not a rule. It is an observation. It's the 4% observation. And to actually make a strategic decision based off that observation is the law of gravity is a law because it's an observed law and we know it's going to work. The 4% rule is not a law. It's an observation. So let's stop treating it like it is what it is. And more often than not, the people who claim that it works are the ones who haven't even read the paper. So let's not even go there. So you've done that first, but then we also just don't look at this deterministically as one line. You also put in various spending rules to adjust based off of what actually happens. Can you talk to me about what those are?
Yes, Jason, thank you. And you can see I'm really excited about this. I think that Bill Bengen, who is the original inventor, let's call it, of the so-called 4% rule, is a genius in my book. And Bill, I've met Bill, I've talked to him, we've had conversation on several occasions, and Bill will be the first to admit that the 4% rule, in quotes, was never designed to be this. It's almost like the industry has made it the Newton's fourth law of motion, right? It wasn't designed. Yes,
exactly. That's the thing. This is the worst part, right? It's an academic or a researcher will create something that a marketing department will run rampant with, right? I have the same thing right now. I have the same problem going on right now with all the advisor gamma reports and everything else. This is fantastic. Let's track this exactly. And let's put this on the statements to show value. I'm like, whoa, hold on a sec. This is so situationally dependent upon what the client came in with and what happens year to year. And how long do you get to take credit for a decision made 10 years ago? Like, it's driving me nuts. And again, never fail to underestimate how a marketer can twist and pervert something that was never meant to be a rule. So I don't blame Bengen on it. I don't blame it on Bengen. I blame it on the industry.
Absolutely. And, he will be the first to acknowledge that. But I think Bengen gave us a seed, right? And what is often not talked about is the additional body of research that have gone into expanding that framework. He called it sustainable withdrawal rate framework, and there has been several additions to that body of work by people like Jonathan Guyton, who created a dynamic spending rule. It's just one of those rules. Bengen himself created another dynamic spending rule. And the idea is, let's say you start retirement today by taking any given level of withdrawal rate from your portfolio. The idea is that you can review that on an ongoing basis. So you can track the withdrawal rate, which forms the basis for the relationship between the portfolio and the level of withdrawal that you're making on it. And you set guardrails, right? So if the withdrawal rate rises above a certain level, it must be that the relationship between your portfolio and the amount that you're taking from your portfolio is going in the wrong direction. And so you set a cap, so to speak. So you might say, well, I'm going to start my withdrawal, let's say, on sort of as 5% of my initial portfolio, and then I will review that rate on an ongoing basis. If that rate goes above a certain level, let's say, goes above 6% of my portfolio, I'm going to adjust my withdrawal down. And I might set a lower guardrail and say, well, if I get to a point where I'm taking below 4% of my current balance in any given year, I'm going to review my withdrawal upward. The key is you set guardrails to manage that journey. And this is one of the beauty in Timeline. I don't know of any other software in the marketplace, A, that allows you to apply any combinations of this strategy, and B, that automatically tracks the journey. Because as you said, we make a decision on day one. It's never a done and forgotten situation. So Timeline, we have this feature or functionality that we call live track that automatically pulls the data, the latest valuation, the latest withdrawal from the account, and tests the sustainability of the plan on an ongoing basis and sends the advisor actionable alerts to point them to make course corrections if necessary. I think this is the beauty of what we can do with technology today.
Excellent. Absolutely. So we've gone over Graydon's guardrails, which is a much more intuitive strategy than the 4% rule. Because what we're basically saying is we're going to modify within a range based off of whatever return is relative to withdrawal. So that makes a heck of a lot more sense than a flat number that's a rule. The second one you have is a floor and ceiling rule. You want to explain how that one works?
Yes. So the floor and ceiling rule, you can think of it in different ways. So you can do a floor and ceiling rule with just how you increase your withdrawal based on inflation, right? So let's say, for instance, that your inflation expectation is 3%. You can do kind of a cap and collar, if you like, and say, well, look, regardless of what happens to inflation, I want to be in a position where my withdrawals will go up by 2% a year, let's say. So you set that as the floor, and then you set a cap. And you say, well, regardless of what inflation does, I'm never going to increase my withdrawal over and above 5%. So in a very aggressive inflationary environment, you don't increase the withdrawal over and above a certain limit. So you can do that floor and ceiling rule just with inflation or with portfolio performance. And so Bengen was actually the originator of the floor and ceiling rule, but he did it based on portfolio performance. So you set the floor of your withdrawal in inflation-adjusted terms, and then you say, depending on investment performance, if investment returns are higher than this worst-case scenario expectation on which the floor is based, then we can increase our withdrawal over and above that level of floor. And maybe also we can adjust it down. It will never go below that floor that we've set. So
at the end of the day, you're basically saying, I'm happy with this range. I'm happy with this collar. So therefore, but I'm willing to adapt based on market conditions.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then, of course, you, friend of the show, Michael Kitces, you basically utilized his ratcheting rule. Explain how that one works and contrast that to the other ones.
Yeah. Again, Michael's rule is actually very similar to the floor and ceiling rule. So Michael says, well, suppose we assume that the 4% rule is based on the worst case scenario. Let's set that as the baseline. Michael says every 3 years, let's review the plan. If our portfolio is higher than 150% of where we started or 125% of where we started, the beauty in Timeline is you can calibrate this, but you set your own threshold. So every 3 years, you review the plan, and then you say, well, I started with $1 million in year one. I'm taking 40 grand out of $1 million. I'm adjusting that with inflation. In year three, if my portfolio is if I'm now sitting at 1.5 million, it's kind of stupid for me to still carry on taking 40 grand a year. I can actually ratchet up my withdrawal, and you set the level of ratcheting. So you might say, well, we're going to increase the withdrawal by X% over and above inflation. So the weakness of the ratcheting rule is that unlike the guardrails, it doesn't, at least in Michael's model, it doesn't allow you for you to ratchet downwards. It just assumes that you set the baseline. Once you increase the withdrawal, it's kind of a permanent increase because the portfolio is so far ahead that it can support that level of withdrawal in the portfolio.
And here's what I like about all of this, right? It's again, we're talking about probabilistic. I mean, I think I get this question all the time too from retirees, which is people about to retire. It's like, okay, so I have this, I want this amount of money, or how much can I afford to spend? And it's really not that. My response, I always say, like, I want to model the entire thing in a financial plan, because instead of picking a number, how about we actually look at what you spend and what your lifestyle looks like? However, even with that, what they're really looking for is deterministic answers in a probabilistic world. And that's just not how it works. When I look about this approach specifically of using the different factors for how we're going to ratchet up or down, or choosing whatever methodology you want to use, is that you're coaching them that this is not a deterministic answer. This is a probabilistic one. We have to accept the volatile nature of this.
I think you sum it up very well. I'm not sure if you're familiar with his work, legendary Nick Murray. Basically, I'm paraphrasing now, saying that volatility is the price of the admission into the capital market, is the price of admission into the capital market. We cannot pine for a world without volatility. And I think that we do ourselves a disservice as financial planners if we create, this is what these straight line deterministic models do. If we give the client an impression, or we reinforce the impression in clients that this is a deterministic journey, it's not. And so all we can do is to bring the reality of volatility straight in front of them, because they're far better prepared for it. And that goes back into why we think in timeline it's really important not just to calculate the success rate at the start of the journey, but also do so on an ongoing basis, because we're far more equipped for it. One other last point that I'm going to make is that the advantage of planning this spending strategy is that we can better prepare clients for these changes that we're likely to make along the way. It's crazy that we give people an impression that they can be facing a 30-year retirement journey and it's all a straight line.
Yeah, I like to say, asking someone to do that is like shooting an arrow through space and time. You're asking me to hit a target that's 30 years away and you to bullseye it. Like, I'm sorry. Short of some Doctor Who level technology, that's not going to happen. And that's just not just a UK reference. I watch Doctor Who. So the one thing I want to touch on before we wrap up is the client deliverable, which I think is utterly fantastic, by the way, the personalized withdrawal policy statement. Speak to me about what a withdrawal policy statement is and what it tells people.
Thank you. So I think of withdrawal policy statement as a behavioral mechanism that we can use to guide the client's expectation. And so basically, we've created these things. You can make the withdrawal policy statement as simple as you want, a one-page document, or you can have a far more, maybe a little bit more elaborate document. But basically, it will give you the basic inputs, i.e. the client's current asset, their asset allocation, different income that they have, and what they want to withdraw from their portfolio. You would also give them a summary of what the withdrawal strategy is, give them sort of an understanding of what kind of market conditions we would need to make changes to their withdrawal and what those withdrawal might be broadly. And then you give them an indication of what the success rate and legacy and spending is going to look like. To me, the withdrawal policy statement is like a compass, so that when, I like to say, when crap hits the fans, as it did in March, and we're having this conversation with the clients, the conversation is not going to be that, oh gosh, this is a market condition that we haven't anticipated. The conversation is, well, actually, we've modeled this type of market conditions in your financial plan. The question is, what kind of changes did we say that we're going to make? Oh, by the way, we did agree this in the withdrawal policy statement because you agree that we're going to implement this strategy. So it's a powerful behavioral coaching mechanism that we can adopt with clients in retirement.
Yeah, I showed the sample template of what you guys did there to my business partner who specializes in specifically dealing with people transitioning into an early stages of retirement. And his exact words is, "Oh my God, yes," because that is he deals with it every day. And those are the biggest concerns. If X happens, if something happens, what am I going to do? And you can plan for that. Don't get me wrong. You can plan for that in some financial planning softwares now with scenario analysis. But I think carving it out and having it as a separate single deliverable to say, here's what's going to happen. You're going to take X. Something happens, you're going to stay within these ranges. This is when we trigger these things. This is where the money's coming from. Like, just brilliant. Like that, you're specifically speaking to the underlying fear of the client, which is fantastic. So good work there.
Thank you. Thank you. You're very kind.
Oh, well, it's well earned. So before we wrap up, there's 3 questions I asked everybody just to get you thinking. The first question is if you had one wish for something you could change in your company or the industry as a whole, what would it be?
That's a very good question. I feel like I have been on this journey, on this campaign, just to make financial planner globally, right? Not just in the UK. Timelines available to planners in Canada, in Australia, in the US, just to recognize that there is much, much more that we can do for clients by adopting an evidence-based approach to decumulation. I think if I could wave a magic wand, it will be for everyone to come to sort of the realization of that fact.
I wave a magic wand and make them all actually listen to evidence in this industry. That would be a first start. Second question for you. What's been the biggest challenge in the company to where it is today?
I think that COVID was a challenge for everyone, right? For us as a startup, we were like many businesses, we were frankly taken by surprise. This scenario where everyone's working.
You didn't have a pandemic button? Really? There was no pandemic button?
No, everyone's working remotely. There is no industry conference, no face-to-face meeting, not just for us, but also for our users, for financial planners. Is a scenario that nobody modeled. We didn't. But the incredible thing is I was massively surprised by how quickly we were able to pivot as a business in the way that we operate. We've always been a global company in our outlook. We have developers all over the place in South America, in Europe, and almost overnight, to move the entire team to work remotely was an incredible achievement. I am really proud by how quickly we were able to pivot, which was a little bit of a challenge for some of our more established competitor, shall we say. So really, really proud of that.
And the last question is, what excites you the most about what it is you're working on and gets you probably more into keep fighting the good fight?
I think for me, it's that retirement is a global problem. We're trying to build a global company that solves that. If you look at the US market, I don't know what the data is in Canada, but if you look at the US...
Guaranteed worse, continue.
But if you look at the US market, there is literally 10,000 baby boomers retiring every day. Right? You can do the numbers in terms of how many that will be in a year. We do the same numbers in the UK. There's 400,000 baby boomers reaching the age of retirement every single year. I don't know what the numbers is in Canada, and my apologies for that, but it will be somewhere in the middle. Right. So this is a global problem. And so therefore, I'm really excited that we can help bring solutions to the market. And that's not even talking about all the other market. We're working with players in Australia, New Zealand, those sort of markets. So I'm really excited by the sheer size of the opportunity to help people and to make a difference in their life.
Excellent. Well, Abraham, thank you so much for taking the time today. Very much appreciate it.
Jason, I'm very grateful for your time. Thank you very much.
So that was today's episode of Fintech Impact with Abraham of Timeline App. I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you took a lot of what we talked about to heart. We went into some different methodologies for how to use a mental framework for understanding decumulation. This is a big and ever-growing concern, as you heard, in terms of just the number of people retiring, and this is going to be a massive central field or central focus of the industry for years to come. So take the time to check out Timeline. And as always, if you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, take care.
This podcast was brought to you by Woodgate Financial, an award-winning financial planning firm catering to high net worth individuals and their families. To learn more, go to woodgate.com. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play, or find more episodes at jasonpereira.ca.